Hello and welcome to Nat Chat. I'm Mirella Rich. Today our guest is Margaret Lindorf, who was a homeschool teacher and also a qualified primary and secondary school teacher. Welcome to the program, Margaret.
Thank you, Mirella.
And thanks again for coming back this week. We were talking last week about, at the end of the show, we ended with socialisation. And some people say, oh, you know, children who are homeschooled, maybe they're not as social as children who go to school. And, you know, we sort of recapped a bit and talked about, you know, you're better off being alone, as George Washington said, than to be
in bad company.
So, but you had some article as well in the, was it in the Australian, about the socialisation aspect of homeschooling?
The article came out of Florida, actually, about socialisation. Do you want me to read it to you?
Yes, thank you.
Because one of the most commonly asked questions about homeschooled children are, what about socialisation? In findings which contradict this major criticism of homeschooling, a study done by a university in Florida has shown that homeschooled children are not disadvantaged compared with children who attend traditional schools. The study compared two groups of 70 children from ages 8 to 10. One group was educated solely at home, the other in conventional schools. They were videotaped whilst playing and their behaviour observed by trained counsellors who did not know which group the children belonged to. The study found no big difference in self-concept or assertiveness, but the homeschooled children showed fewer behavioural problems. The traditionally schooled group were more aggressive, loud and talkative, while the homeschooled children tended to speak quietly, play well in groups and take the initiative, inviting others to join in activities. Suggestions given were that children taught at home depend more on their adult contact and less on contact with peers for their social development. They behave better because they imitate their parents, while traditionally schooled children model themselves on others in the classroom. And there we have the issue of the peer pressure and well, just the different being with their school friends longer than actually are with their parents at home.
That's right. And also, you know, like today there's this awful thing about the cyberbullying with teenagers and at school. It's just, it's really terrible. I mean, it just should not be like that. You know? No. Something's obviously wrong.
And we'll say something like, well, why don't they, if they're being bullied, cyberbullied, why don't they just switch the internet off and not go on to it to find out what people are saying about them? But the peer pressure is so great and they want to feel they belong, that they need to check out just to make sure maybe someone's saying something good about me for a change or something like that. Right. So that, you know, it's a compulsion.
Isn't it terrible? I think in schools and everywhere people should be taught to be who they are and not to worry about what other people think. Don't do bad things, obviously, but be true to your heart. Follow your heart, be who you are, and don't worry about what everyone thinks, because you won't achieve anything if you're going to be constantly worrying what people think of you.
The people thinking, yes.
You can't live, you can't grow like that.
That's right.
So all you teenagers, listen.
Yes.
Be confident with who you are. You know,
yes.
You're beautiful with who you are. You know, and just be who you are.
Yes.
That breaks my heart when I hear things like that.
Yes.
Yeah. But there was another article as well, you said, I think it was on tests or something done with homeschool children, or was there something else you were talking about off camera?
In the Australian, there was an article about the literacy standards of the children. Now, this article was written 20 years ago, but I recently heard that with all the money that the government is throwing at the schools, the standard in literacy and maths has not changed. It's even gone backwards a little bit. And in actual fact, there are studies that show that the children of this generation, for the very, very first time, have lower standards than their parents. All throughout history, you know, going back 200 years in Australia, obviously, the next generation are usually have a higher standard than their parents, their grandparents or whatever. But for the first time, the standard is just dropping, and Australia is fairly well down in, you know, in comparing with other countries around the world. And this study that was in the Australian, which I'd say because the standard has dropped even further, this is applicable today. And it's just said that that an overwhelming majority of students entering secondary school cannot decipher many words of 2 and 3 syllables because the way they are taught to read and write is seriously flawed. A study of 650 6 to 14-year-olds carried out by independent researchers found that the whole language method of reading and writing, which is taught in most primary schools, isn't really benefiting children at all. 85% of boys and 75% of girls have difficulty reading, and at the end of primary school, it's no different than when they were 7 years of age. So when they were 7, they experienced difficulty, and by the age of 12, almost 40% of them are still making the same mistakes.
From the age of 7? That's really wow.
So what have they been doing between the ages of 7 and 12? What have they been taught? And I guess it looks like if you're in a school where there are 25 to 30 children in the school, especially if the children are not streamed, if all the children in that classroom are expected to do the same work, the children that are on the lower scale are just getting further and further and further behind. Because the teacher hasn't got time to concentrate on the children you can imagine if all 25 children would all have varying degrees of literacy.
Yeah.
So it makes it really hard.
Well, we'll continue with this. We just have to go to a break for now.
Thank you.
You're watching Nat Chat. Stay with us. We'll be back very shortly. Hello and welcome back to Nat Chat. I'm Mirella Rich. If you've just joined us, we're here with Margaret Lindorf, who was a homeschool teacher, and she was also a primary school teacher and a secondary school teacher when she wasn't homeschooling her own children. Welcome back to the program, Margaret.
Thanks, Mirella.
Now, before the break, we talked about another study that was done in the Australian. You've got another study here on some literacy studies that have been done on homeschooled children versus children who have gone to school?
Well, this study is actually a study where they interviewed. It correlates with the study that we were talking about before, where the children, many children or 40% of children who leave primary school still have the same issues with their 2 and 3 syllables sounding out as they had when they were 7. And this sort of correlates with it too. This was another study done in Australia by interviewers. And the people in this study were aged between 15 and 74. And the result of the study showed that only 17% of Australians overall are capable of managing the literacy demands of everyday life.
Wow.
So like reading papers and understanding and signing forms, filling out forms and things like that. Yeah. They also showed that only 10% of people aged between 15 and 19 can manage the literacy demands of everyday life.
That's shocking.
So it's very yes, it's not a very good look, is it, for Australian children going just the school, the whole system of education.
It's quite amazing because even I was reading as well, in North Carolina, the number of homeschoolers has now surpassed the number of students attending private schools. So, wow, it's quite amazing, isn't it? More people are homeschooling
than sending their children to private schools.
Yeah.
Well, the cost of private schools is so high too. I was reading recently that to homeschool your child at school could cost you only about 10% of what you're paying to send them to a private school. So if the parent is happy to stay at home, either mum or dad, I know a family where both of them nurse at at a hospital and they share that nursing, so one of them will be home with the children while the other one is working and vice versa. So if you can do that, if you can organise that, not only are you giving your children a good one-on-one education, but you're saving so much more money. And then you've got more money to spend on after school activities. Like we spent a lot of money with the girls on buying them really good Christian novels. We used to go to the Christian bookshop in Geelong, and we'd go there and they'd buy series, you know, go back and get the next series and whatever. And that was another one of the reasons why we kept them out of school. Like we always thought maybe we could put them back into school when they get a little bit older, but we heard not even from Christian parents, but just from parents who didn't really have any religion about the books that they were reading in the year 11 and 12 syllabus, you know, which you must read in order to get your VCE. And most of the books were not very wholesome at all. So most of the books coming into our house were either Christian or Catholic books, you know.
Yeah, it's so important. Why would you want to fill their mind with all this rubbish? I mean, it's just so pointless and empty and geez. Yeah, well, that's really beautiful to hear that. Well, see, there's another way. It's always good to show people another way. And what would you say to some mums maybe who are homeschooling now and they're very passionate about it, but maybe they're a little bit struggling a little bit or they're having a difficult time? Is there any advice you can give them since you've now done it and now your children are doing it to their children?
Yeah, well, there's no criteria for... You can homeschool your children regardless of your own education. I mean, studies over in America, where there are studies about homeschooling children who sit for the SAT test, there actually is not much difference in their average scores if the parents are both university trained or if neither parent has gone to university. The percentile is about 89 to 90th percentile if both parents are academics, whereas it's still about 84 percentile if the parents have had no college or university education. So there's not a lot of difference. So the children are still achieving at a much higher rate than, say, 50 percentile for those who go to public schools is the average over in America.
So they're actually achieving more homeschool even if the parents don't have degrees.
So the same can go for that in Australia. If a parent feels inadequate, I'm sure every parent can would know the work, be able to keep up with the children's work once, you know, primary school. So it's really a continuation, as I said before, of just teaching them their numbers and sounds and all that sort of thing, and then just going on and getting some good curriculum. But if a parent isn't up to teaching, you know, higher maths, hire a tutor. It's still one-on-one, and the child will feel more confident because they know that the tutor knows a little bit more than mum or dad might know. Yes.
And on this topic, would there be parents that would not be appropriate for homeschooling, would you say? Can everyone homeschool their children, or should some not homeschool their children?
Well, I would say, as a former prep teacher, and I think nowadays, talking to other prep teachers, there are some children who come into prep who do not know the basics, like they can't even count up to 5 on one finger. They don't know one colour from another. Some are not even toilet trained. Those parents really don't qualify for homeschooling. I mean, if they're continuing on that line where they haven't taught the children just incidental, basic, you know, like you just incidentally teach them those sort of things, how to count to 5, don't you? And so I really don't see how they would cope. But any mother or father who is already a home mum and doesn't actually want to get back into the workforce and has successfully taught their children everything they need to know up until the age of 5 won't have any trouble homeschooling.
Just continuation.
Yeah, just a continuation.
Oh, that's beautiful. And also you're going to talk about the university, the people that have homeschooled and gone on to university versus the people who've gone through traditional schools and gone on to university. What are some of the information you've got on that?
I haven't got the figures, like how many people they actually looked at. And this is coming out, as I said, there's not a lot of figures in Australia, but this is coming out of America, and the retention rate is a lot higher. 67% will stay at uni, will not drop out, whereas it's about 55% will drop out during their university course if they've been taught in a traditional school.
And why do you think that is, from your own experience?
It could be something to do with perseverance, resilience, concentration, because the homeschooled children, especially if they're in a large family where the parent can't give them one-on-one all the time, the children will quite often have to work on his or her own, and just ask for help when they need it. So therefore they're able to work on their own. Once they get into university, they're expected to work on their own. Like, like they're given assignment dates when you have to have assignments in, but oftentimes they are not reminded, whereas at school, you make sure that's in next Monday. They're not reminded, they get behind, they lose points because they haven't got assignments in. And I think, that's where it all,
Okay, beautiful. We'll have to go to a break now. You're watching Nat Chat. Stay with us. We'll be back with more very shortly. Hello and welcome back to Nat Chat. I'm Mirella Rich. If you've just joined us, we're here with Margaret Lindorf, who was a Catholic homeschool teacher to 3 of her 5 children, and she was also a primary school teacher and a secondary school teacher in between times. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Mirella.
And when I say in between times, I mean like years when you were in homeschooling.
Yes, a long time between, yes.
And so it was 15 years ago since you've been homeschooling, isn't it now? Is that
when
right?
our youngest did her HSC, yes.
Wow,
she was the only one who did external exams for her HSC, and we had to travel to Wagga for her to do her exams up there. Yes, and she did really well in them too. So
my brother's in Wagga. Hi, Marco. In the seminary. So why do you think more families are homeschooling now? There's been an increase in homeschooling. Why do you think more families are homeschooling? Is it religious reasons? Is it what are the reasons, do you think?
Well, some of them would be religious reasons, but I recently read that really only about 20% pull their children out of school for religious reasons. Many of them pull their children out of school because of the standard of the education in their local schools. Maybe some pull them out because of the expense of sending them to a private school. A lot of families can't afford to send them to private schools. Maybe they speak to other homeschooling families who say we can do it, a lot cheaper and we can do it easier ourselves because we can use the same books too. When you've got children at school, the textbooks are so expensive and then you can't even hand them down sometimes because they want the next edition. They won't, go for the first edition. You've got to get the second edition. And so in homeschooling, really, you use the same textbooks all the way through. Maybe just get some extra workbooks for them to use. It's a lot.
I remember when we were at school, my dad used, because I'm one of 8 children, my dad used to buy all our school books, and then he'd make us wait to get them handed down from the older ones to the younger ones. And I remember once when it was my turn and I had my school books, I was thinking, I don't need these next year, so I started selling them at school. And my dad goes, where's that? You meant to hand it down to Simona.
Oh, yes, of course.
So it was a bit of a family joke.
Well, interesting enough, we didn't actually take our children out of school. Many Catholics are surprised at that because many Catholics who take their children out, the majority, take them out because they feel like the Catholic schools are no longer Catholic. They're not teaching the children what they wish them to teach. So they bring them out of school.
I've heard that,
Yes, but we didn't bring them out for those. We brought them out for actually educational, academic reasons. But then after 2 or 3 years, we wouldn't put them back into school because, as I said before, because of the type of novels they were expected to read in the higher classes, and also just the bad vibes that you get from mixing with children that you don't know who your children are mixing with. And so with us, we made sure the children went to homeschooling camps. We had 2 of those a year, one in September, usually, and then another one in April in Victoria. A couple of times we went to New South Wales to the Tumbarumba ones, and the girls loved those. And they met so many other children of their same age who had the same values, like-minded. And it didn't just stop at just the homeschooling camps, they actually would finish their schoolwork, say at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and before tea start writing letters. So there's a lot of letter writing. We've got boxes of the letters still under their beds at home, but, you know.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So they had a really great, you know, connection with those, and then invite them to their 18th and their 21st birthdays, and still in contact with them even after all this time. And many of them have gone on to homeschool their own children as well.
Beautiful.
Yes. So.
And also, you said you had conferences. Did you have a lot of support, and what sort of conferences did you have?
The conferences, they're called conferences, the homeschooling days would be like every March, I think it was, at the beginning of the year, there would be a whole weekend where you could go listen to people speaking from the Light Educational Ministries I was speaking about before, from the Catholic education side, like the lady Pat Mills, who supplies the Seton books. She would have all her books there, talk to people, answer questions. And also Kingsley, who were in Melbourne, they were huge Christian organisation, come and speak, bring all their wares and everything. So the whole room would be full of curriculum you could buy, but also plenty of people to speak to.
And yourself, did you have, like, while you were homeschooling your children, did you feel you had enough support around you with other homeschool mums? Like, did you talk to them or socialise or meet regularly?
We did. Once a fortnight, we would go meet up with another family for art, craft.
And you do it together?
We did it together. I would teach some of them the piano, a couple of them, while their mum took my kids for art, because I'm not arty at all, or making things, crafty stuff. Yeah. And then they'd spend another hour or so outside playing. It'd be hard to find when it was time to go home. And then I also got involved for a little while with the Christian homeschooling people in Geelong. We would go to, say, excursions down to Queenscliff, especially arranged excursions where they could see, go to see animals and just to study, like science excursions, yes.
Oh, that's good, isn't it?
So, yes.
It's all about learning, and learning through nature, learning through what's going on around you as well.
Yes.
And you also wrote a newsletter. Can you tell us a little bit about your homeschool newsletter that you were writing when you were homeschooling?
Yes, many, many years ago. We were at a camp and someone came up with the idea that we should put out a newsletter once a quarter for families offered. So we probably did it for about 10 years or so. As far as I know, it's still going, the Victorian Homeschooling Newsletter. Yep. So we just did one term, and then 3 other families contributed to the other term. So it was up to us to write about our family and also to find articles, that were really worthwhile.
Thank you so much for coming on the program. It's come to an end now.
Oh, thank you, Morella. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's been lovely having you talk, enlighten everyone about homeschooling.
Hope so.
And from a teacher too, so it's really good to hear.
Yeah.
You've been watching Nat Chat. I hope you enjoyed the program. I'm Morella Rich and our guest was Margaret Lindorf. See you again soon.